Somewhere in the mountains, maybe in a holler in Tennessee or along a ridge in West Virginia, there is a jar buried beneath a doorstep. It has been there for over 100 years. Inside it, bent pins, nail clippings, and something older and stranger than most people know how to name. You've heard of skinwalkers, you've seen the posts, but what you haven't heard, what has been quietly living in the bones of these mountains for 300 years, is something far more real, far more layered, and far more alive than any viral horror story. Welcome back to Golden Cow Media, where folklore, history, and legend intertwine. I'm glad you're here. If you enjoy stories of forgotten traditions and the living history of the land beneath our feet, consider subscribing. There's a great deal more to explore. To understand Appalachian folk magic, you first have to understand the mountains themselves. The Appalachian Range stretches over 2,000 miles, from the island of Newfoundland down through New England, across the spine of the eastern United States, all the way to Alabama and Georgia. These are ancient mountains, older than any nation that has ever claimed them, and the people who settled their hollers and ridges arrived with very little. No reliable roads, no hospitals, no courts of law that could reach them quickly. They came with their knowledge, and they came with their faith. From the 18th century onward, waves of Scottish, Irish, and German settlers poured into the mountains following the ridgeline south. They brought their customs, their prayer books, their charms, their half-remembered traditions from the old world. They found indigenous communities, Cherokee, Shawnee, and others who had lived in these mountains for thousands of years, and over generations those cultures touched, blurred, and exchanged. What grew from that meeting wasn't chaos, it was something coherent, something functional, something that answered the very real needs of the people living hard lives far from any official help. It was Appalachian folk magic. And it is still here. Let's clear something up right away. When most people think of a witch, they think of a singular image. The crone in the forest, the figure outside the community, the outcast. In Appalachian tradition, it was never that simple. There were distinct roles within these communities. Each one served a real function, and the line between healer and witch was not always clear. It was often a matter of perception, of reputation, of who liked you and who didn't. The most iconic figure was the Granny Witch, and despite the name, she wasn't always elderly, and she wasn't always a woman, though women dominated the role. Granny was a title of respect, a position, not a description. A Granny Witch was the community's cornerstone. She delivered babies and sat with the dying. She knew which plants brought fever down and which prayers kept evil from the cradle. She carried a worn Bible in one hand and a bundle of dried herbs in the other, and she saw no contradiction between them. Neither did her neighbors. Her home was recognizable, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the smell of wood smoke and tinctures, and steady stream of quiet visitors at all hours. She might deliver a baby at dawn, prepare a charm against souring milk by mid-morning, and sit with a dying elder by nightfall, all in a single day. She was compensated not in cash was scarce in the mountains, but in food, in labor, in a repaired fence. And she was respected by people who might simultaneously attend Sunday church and think nothing strange about consulting her on Monday. Mainstream Protestant churches, Baptist and Methodist in particular, were deeply ambivalent about granny witches. They occasionally condemned the practice from the pulpit, but their own congregants quietly kept consulting them. In many communities, the Granny Witch held more practical authority than the preacher. Then there were the Yarb Doctors, herb doctors, specialists in plant-based healing. Their knowledge was extraordinary. They knew exactly which root to boil for fever, which bark to chew for a toothache, which poultice to infection from the wound. They organized their entire year around gathering. Spring for tender new growth, summer for flowers and leaves, autumn for roots and bark, winter for preparation and teaching. They knew when to harvest each plant for maximum potency. Before sunrise, after dew, on a waxing moon. This was empirical knowledge accumulated and refined over generations. And this knowledge was not given lightly. It was passed down with great care, often only to someone of the opposite sex, man to woman, woman to man, to preserve its power. Handing plant knowledge to just anyone was considered wasteful, a sacred inheritance, not a commodity. Much of this plant knowledge had deep roots in Cherokee and other indigenous traditions, absorbed through generations of proximity and exchange. It is important to name something here. The forced removal of Cherokee communities during the Trail of Tears in 1838 severed many of those living knowledge lines, even as some of the knowledge itself had already been passed into mountain settler practice. That loss matters, and it shaped what the tradition became. Beyond the healers, there were the power doctors, sometimes called water witches or dowsers. These were people believed to possess specific divinely granted gifts, not learned skills, not earned abilities, gifts given by God and held in trust for the community. The most common gifts included stopping blood from a wound, talking fire out of a burn, curing thrush in infants, and finding underground water with a forked stick. Think about what that last one meant practically. In a region with no municipal water supply, choosing where to dig your well was one of the most consequential decisions a farming family could make. A water witch, who walked slowly across the land holding a fresh-cut forked branch of peach or willow, waiting for it to dip toward the earth, was not a curiosity. She was essential. Families watched carefully and noted exactly where the rod pointed before picking up a spade. And the blood-stopping gift was equally serious. In a region defined by physically dangerous work, logging, mining, farming with unpredictable animals, severe injuries were a constant reality. The nearest doctor might be a full day's ride away on rough mountain roads. Someone who could stop a wound from bleeding, even at a distance, just by speaking a specific biblical verse over the injured person's name, that person could save a man's life. These practitioners refused payment. To accept money for a God-given gift was believed to cause it to fade. This insistence kept them embedded in the community rather than elevated above it. The poorest family had access to the same supernatural emergency services as the wealthiest. And then there was the fourth type, distinct from all the others in the community's eyes, the feared witch. A real witch, in Appalachian belief, was someone who used their power selfishly or maliciously to blight crops, sour milk, cause illness, or take revenge on a neighbor. Signs of witchcraft were very specific: livestock dying without cause, churns that refused to yield butter after unusually long effort, children falling sick after a recent quarrel with a particular person. The witch was not necessarily a stranger. She was often someone known, someone the community had grown uneasy about. A woman who had outlived too many husbands. A woman who owned property that neighbors coveted. Someone simply too forthright, too strange, too solitary. Witch accusations were a powerful weapon. In tight-knit, isolated communities where reputation was everything and formal law was distant, alleging that someone had bewitched your livestock could damage them socially, isolate them, or endanger them, without any legal process at all. But the people were only half the story. The other half was the work itself. At the heart of Appalachian folk magic were verbal charms and written formulas. Spoken words carried power. Written words carried more. The physical object of the charm, held in the hand or pinned to the body, was understood to bind the intention in a more permanent way. One of the most important texts was The Long Hidden Friend, a German origin book of charms published in Pennsylvania in 1820 by a man named John George Homan. It circulated through the communities with German heritage all down the mountain chain, and it contained hundreds of formulas for healing, protection, and daily life, every single one framed in the language of Christian prayer and scripture. This was strategically important. It made the practices defensible to churches that might otherwise condemn them. A charm written for a sick child might be penned on a scrap of paper from a paper bag, folded exactly 3 times, and pinned inside the child's nightgown. The paper was never to be opened or read again. Doing so would break the charm. When the child recovered, the paper was burned or buried at a crossroads. The transmission rules were strict. Many charms could only pass from a man to a woman or from a woman to a man, never same sex. Some could only be given to one person at a time. Sharing a charm publicly destroyed its power entirely. Protection magic was built directly into the home itself, woven into its architecture and daily routines. Horseshoes were nailed above front doors, always hung with the ends pointing upward to hold the luck in. Iron was considered universally protective against spirits and magic, drawing on old European traditions that the settlers brought with them. The family's cast iron cookware hanging in the kitchen was understood to be doing double duty, cooking supper and warding the house. Salt was scattered across doorways and windowsills to prevent evil from entering. Sweeping after dark was strictly forbidden. It was said to sweep the good fortune out with the dust. Brooms were placed bristle side up beside the door. The belief was that a witch or malevolent spirit approaching the threshold would be compelled by its nature to count every single straw before crossing. A broom with hundreds of straws could guard the house all night. Sieves, colanders, fishnets placed near doors or beds served the same purpose. The compulsive counting was a built-in trap. Hold stones, stones with naturally occurring holes found in streams, were hung above beds and doorways. The hole was believed to let you see through glamours and illusions and to prevent hags from entering the room. And then there were the witch bottles. Buried beneath doorsteps or hearths, these bottles contained urine, bent pins, nail clippings, sometimes hair. The logic was precise. A witch sending a curse was believed to follow the intimate personal connection of the target's urine. The bent pins inside the bottle would torment the attacking witch spiritually, and the sealed vessel would imprison the harmful force. The bottle had to remain hidden and in a permanent location. If it was found and broken, the protection ended immediately. When a family moved away, they left the bottle where it was, which is exactly why so many have been discovered by later occupants during renovation and construction work, sometimes over a century after they were placed. There is one belief from this tradition that nearly anyone will recognize, even if they've never heard it called by name. It was called Hag Riding. The hag was believed to visit sleeping people in the night. She would sit on your chest to steal your breath, fill your dreams of terror, and leave you exhausted and aching by morning. Signs you had been hag-ridden, waking up unable to move or speak, a crushing weight on your chest. Hair found tangled in the morning, well, the hag had been witch-plating it in the night. And horses found the next day, sweaty and run ragged. Hags were believed to ride animals as well as people. We now understand this as sleep paralysis, a well-documented physiological event in which the body remains temporarily paralyzed during a transition between sleep stages, often accompanied by hallucinations and a sensation of pressure on the chest. It is universal. It happens to people all over the world, across every culture. But how a community interprets that experience is culturally significant. In Appalachian communities where witchcraft was a real and present social concern, an episode of sleep paralysis had an immediate, coherent explanation. Someone had sent the hag to you, a neighbor you had quarreled with, a woman known for a sharp tongue, and that naming of the experience gave the sufferer something important. It gave them agency because there were protections. Before sleep, shoes were placed beside the bed with one turned upside down. The hag, compelled by her counting nature, would be occupied sorting them all night. A Bible was placed on the chest, salt was scattered across the windowsill, a sieve sat beneath the bed, the Lord's Prayer was said before closing one's eyes. These were the last rituals of the day, as automatic as banking the fire. And if a witch had already done her work, if you were already suffering, the tradition had answers for that too. If someone was convinced they had been bewitched, Appalachian tradition offered several remedies, and they were not gentle. Drawing blood from a suspected witch was believed to break their power over you. A scratch with a pin was enough. This placed suspected witches in genuine physical danger. It gave someone who believed themselves cursed folk religious justification for physically attacking whoever they suspected, and that justification was taken seriously. Boiling a bewitched person's urine in a pot was believed to cause the witch physical pain, sometimes drawing them to the door of the household where the boiling was happening, clutching the same body part being heated, and in doing so, revealing themselves. And for a witch who seemed otherwise invulnerable, one who could not be harmed by ordinary means, a silver bullet, cast from a silver coin, was believed to be able to kill them at a distance. Silver was expensive. This meant the most potent anti-witch tools were available primarily to those with means, a magical economy that reflected the economic realities of the community. For a hunter whose shot kept missing animals that should have been easy targets, bullets seemed to curve away, the animal remained impossibly calm. The explanation was clear. His gun had been witched. In communities dependent on game for food, unexplained hunting failure was no small matter. The remedy was to melt a silver coin and recast the bullet itself. That bullet would not be deflected. Unlike colonial New England, Appalachia had never organized witch trials with formal legal proceedings, but extrajudicial violence against suspected witches was documented well into the 19th century and occasionally into the early 20th. In isolated communities with distant law enforcement, a suspected witch might be beaten, driven from her home, or killed with little meaningful legal consequence. These cases survive in newspaper records, and they remind us that belief carried real-world weight. Appalachian folk magic never died. It adapted. It moved with the communities that practiced it, and it is still very much alive. Today, it is sometimes called Appalachian granny magic or mountain magic. There are living practitioners who never stop, people who learn from their grandmothers, who still know the charms, who still time their planting by the moon. The children of these households know where the Bible goes when someone sleeps restless. There has also been a significant revival of scholarly and popular interest. Authors like H. Byron Ballard, Jake Richards, and Clarence Gray have written extensively about preserving and practicing these traditions authentically. authentically, not as curiosity, not as performance, but as a living inheritance that belongs to specific communities and deserves to be treated with genuine respect. If this tradition interests you, their work is where to start. Hex signs still appear on barns in German-influenced Appalachian communities, salt still crosses some doorsteps, and somewhere in a house whose address you will never know, a jar of bent pins is still doing its work beneath the threshold. And this brings us to why this video exists. Appalachia is a topic that has exploded online in recent years, and much of what circulates, the viral posts, the horror content, the things from the Appalachian Mountains lists, borrows the aesthetic of the region while trading in something it doesn't belong to. Skinwalkers are a Navajo concept. They do not belong to Appalachian tradition. Their inclusion in content about these mountains flattens two entirely distinct indigenous and settler folk traditions into a single vague category of American mountain scary. That flattening does a disservice to both. The real tradition is stranger, richer, and far more interesting, and it belongs to real people who are still there. If this is a tradition new to you, I'd encourage you to look into the writers I mentioned, Jake Richards, H. Byron Ballard, Clarence Gray, and approach the subject with the respect it deserves. This is a living tradition. The people it belongs to are still here. What do you think? Does the reality of Appalachian folk magic surprise you? Is there a specific part of the tradition you'd like to see explored in part 2? Let me know in the comments. I read them all. If you found this valuable, a like goes a long way toward helping other people find it. And if you'd like to come along as I keep pulling at these threads, folklore, history, and the little stories behind legends, subscribe. There's a great deal more to explore. Until then, remember, history remembers, but folklore never forgets.